I think empathy is the first step. And here's the critical thing about empathy. It's just like emotional regulation. You're not born with it. Somebody has to give it to you in order for you to be able to give it away. And very few of us, we're typically better at empathy with our girls than we are with our boys. The definition of empathy, as I'm sure you know, is the capacity to temporarily suspend judgment and step into somebody else's shoes.
Welcome to the Weekly Leadership Experience, a place for leaders to get inspired, be challenged, and grow. I am your host, Rashad Oberlander. Let's get started. Today's episode of the Weekly Leadership Experience is brought to you by my 7-day Leadership Growth Challenge. It's a free challenge that I've created, and it's delivered by email over the course of 7 days. I've created 7 compelling questions to challenge various aspects of your leadership, the way you lead, and why you lead. Go to rashadoberlander.com and scroll down until you find the 7-day Leadership Challenge, or look for the link in the show notes. Hello, leaders, and welcome. I'm excited to be joined today by Dr. Jody Carrington, right here in Alberta, Canada. Dr. Jody is the CEO and Chief Happiness Officer of the Dr. Jody Carrington Company and is the author of Kids These Days, a game plan for reconnecting with those we teach, lead, and love. Over the past 15 years, Dr. Jody has assessed, treated, educated, and empowered some of our most vulnerable and precious souls on the planet. She's a child psychologist by trade, but Jody rarely treats kids. The answer lies, she believes, in the people who hold them. Especially when kids have experienced trauma, that's when they need big people the most. Some of her favorites include educators, parents, first responders, and foster parents. Jody has shifted the way they think and feel about the holy work that they do. Well, Dr. Jody, welcome to the show.
Rashad, thank you for having me. This is exciting. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you, and I love your energy. Thank you.
Yes.
So listen, I always like to start with some of my guests' story. So why don't you just tell us something about yourself that might be a little surprising, and then also what got you into psychology?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I don't know about the surprising stuff. So I know you're in Edmonton right now. I'm in central Alberta right now. I grew up in Viking, which is just outside of Edmonton. And it's home of the Sutter brothers. So 7 boys, 6 make the NHL. So hockey is a huge part of my, everything I love. So my first crush was Ron McLean. And I still feel like I'm in love with him. And I actually still think I'm going to make the NHL. So I don't know if that's surprising or not. But part of the reason that I got into psychology was actually, I think, in no small part due to sort of the roots of a small town. And there was a teacher, there's many teachers, actually. I can tell you the first and last name of every teacher I've had, K-12. So Viking still K-12 school. And I remember just the power of being witnessed, of being seen, And I knew, I think from a very early age that I wanted to be a psychologist. I thought I wanted to be a sports psychologist. And then I was a civilian member with the RCMP for a couple of years. And I started to get a real interest in trauma and organizational trauma and what happens when you don't look after your people. And in this country, we do a really poor job of looking after our first responders. And we do an even worse job of looking after their spouses. Yeah, there's not a single program in North America for first responder spouses currently. And what's interesting to me about that is that you are only as okay as the people who hold you. So one of the mistakes I think we often make in this world of leadership is that we tend to just look after our employees and we forget about the people who hold them. One of the biggest investments of all time is how do you look at building an organization based on family values? Means you have to incorporate however family is defined for the people who come to work for you every day. So I often thought about that after I left the RCMP. And so then I did a lot of work in trauma and police psychology and my first job was on the Lock Psychiatric Inpatient Unit at the Alberta Children's Hospital in Calgary. And again, when I first started there, it was really a lot about the kid, the problem is the kid. And so how do we treat the behavior? How do we alter the trajectory of their story based on just rewards and consequences? And very quickly, I mean, those kids and families taught me, but the phenomenal team I was a part of, we really started to think about relationship and connection and how it actually is the full story of a system that allows people to shift or repair or reconnect with each other. And so I think that was the impetus to, just sort of stepping back in after we had kids. I wanted a small private practice. I wanted to coach hockey. I wanted to do all those things. And so we ended up in Old, which is, sort of a small town in central Alberta. And I started to do a lot of consultations with school divisions around the tough, tricky kids, right? The ones that nobody knew what to do with anymore. They were hitters and kickers and biters and telling everybody to F off. Those are my babies. I like those ones. Yeah. Because what we often miss is their story. Mm-hmm. Get hung up on the behavior, but we forget the system about the importance of acknowledgement. And I think over time, I have done a lot of kids and families have taught me that. And then I would say over this last year since COVID hit, and I spent a lot of time reflecting on my own white privilege and what that looks like. And in fact, it's mostly people from the Indigenous culture who've taught me this. And I'm embarrassed to say it's taken me, I'm a 45-year-old white girl. It's taken me this long to figure this out. But just the simple power of acknowledgement. And I mean, I acknowledge, all the time. I mean, I'm on Treaty 7 land where I'm sitting speaking to you today. And I'm so aware of my role in reconciliation, my ongoing role in reconciliation, and how many footsteps. I mean, this is the unceded territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy. And how many footsteps of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples have come before us. And how it is the power of acknowledgement that is not an apology and it is not a one-shot deal. But when you when you acknowledge, you arise. When you are acknowledged, you will rise. And it is, I think, in that concept of relationship and connection that we started now to build a practice around, because any kid who has a behavioral support plan rarely is acknowledged. Anybody who has struggled a really long time and is burnt out in their job, who build a team who don't work hard for them anymore. The issue is to not give them more tasks or more responsibility. It is simply to acknowledge, to identify the contributions, and then watch it. They will rise. One of my favorite hockey coaches said this: you should see how fast I can get a kid to skate when I know the name of his dog. Huh?
Yes. 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I'm a believer in a lot of John Maxwell's teaching on leadership. I've said it on this podcast a number of times. The 5 Levels of Leadership is a brilliant book. And, the first level being position, you get a promotion, you're now a manager, you're now a leader of this or a leader of that, whatever the case may be. But, a position is only as good as the paper it's written on. And where the real magic starts happening is at the second level, which is relationship. Yes. So, like you say, when you know something about the person you're working with, it makes it more meaningful to be able to work with them, right? So we were talking before we started recording here about how we got connected, and one of my first interactions with your content was a post about relationships and connection, in which you mentioned how we are actually more disconnected than we've ever been. So first of all, you've kind of already alluded to it in your story as you shared just now, but first of all, why is connection and relationships so important?
Well, I think here's the issue. Like, I think what I talk a lot about, right, is the fundamental importance of understanding this concept called emotional regulation. Okay, so when I think about this as a psychologist, it is the heart of all mental illness. It is the heart of getting anybody to perform well. When you are emotionally regulated, it means you remain calm in times of distress. And the people who sort of learn the skills on how to not lose their friggin' mind when things get tough perform well. And the tricky thing with emotional regulation is you can't tell somebody how to calm down. You have to show them. You have to lead them in that way. Yeah. Which really, if I think about this as a child psychologist, it takes me back to the role of parenting, the role of offering mentorship to kids or coaching. It is walking them home through emotional dysregulation. Like when you bring an infant home from the hospital, they lose their friggin' mind. That's how they let you know what they need. Yeah, they cry. Our job is to co-regulate, to walk them home. Shh, 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 shh. And the more I do that in the physical presence of a child repeatedly, the better able they can do that on their own when I'm not there. So as they grow and are surrounded by people who can regulate them, they take on that skill and then can offer that back to their own children, their community, their team. And it really, I mean, I have this quote. I don't know if you're familiar with this philosopher named Ram Dass. And I keep one of his quotes over my shoulder in my office all the time. He says this: "We are all just here walking each other home. We are all just here walking each other home." And I think when you're in a position of leadership, whether you're leading your babies into greatness, your personal children into greatness, or your team, or your family, whatever that looks like, it's this idea to remember that we're just indeed walking each other home. And I'm going to give you the best I can with what I got on any given day. And it's got to be enough.
Yeah.
So much of that job comes back to this emotional regulation. When I witness you, when I see you, you will rise. But it is how I get you regulated in that process that really tells me how much you can perform, how well you can do, how, to the best of your cognitive ability, what you can rise to. But we often think that it's about telling you how to do it, setting out rules and expectations. And we forget this most critical point of just holding space, of just seeing and witnessing first, and then teach, then have the expectations clear, then lay out what I need from you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, and if I'm understanding what you're describing is that the skill of emotional regulation comes after having a connection and relationship with someone.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm much more inclined to regulate with somebody who I like.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if I invest the time in understanding you, knowing the name of your dog, the name of your kids, why you got into this business. Yeah. You're so much more inclined to sort of listen to me or have a conversation with me. And if I work for you and the name of my kids, that, oh my gosh, Asher, he has parkour on Tuesday nights. So Joe, I just want to know, like, if you need to leave at 5:30 to get him there on Tuesday nights, that's amazing. Right. I know how important it is to you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. You know what? I'm going to come in tomorrow morning at 6 because I really want to get this project done for you. It's that idea of when you are acknowledged, you will rise. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And something I maybe hadn't thought of before, but just kind of clicked for me now. And I don't know, but tell me what you think about this. But this goes a little bit deeper than just having empathy, which is important. But
yes,
like this is a deeper, like empathy isn't a strong enough word on its own, I think, for what you're describing and the idea of how this all ties together.
Yeah, I think empathy is the first step. And here's the critical thing about empathy. It's just like emotional regulation. You're not born with it.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has to give it to you in order for you to be able to give it away. And very few of us, we're typically better at empathy with our girls than we are with our boys. The definition of empathy, as I'm sure you know, is the capacity to temporarily suspend judgment and step into somebody else's shoes. And we're really at suspending judgment, right? We often have opinions, yeah? But when I'm going to hold space for you, it is I'm going to, for a second, to suspend judgment. So if I, as a parent, he said, I want a weed pen, I'm going to smoke weed because everybody else is smoking weed. That's what I want to do. Now, for my 16-year-old to come home and say that to me, I'm not a fan. Yeah. But I have to temporarily suspend judgment. Doesn't mean I condone the behavior or support it. I want to understand it. Tell me more. Those 3 words always allow me to sink into empathy. Tell me more. And Stephen Covey said this, but it actually showed up first in the Bible. He said, seek first to understand before being understood. It gives you that space to really step into this idea of like, wait. Help me understand how you got there. And if I temporarily suspend judgment, I can still step back into this and be like, nope, you're not getting a weed pen, dude. But when I understand what this looks like, then I have more capacity than to not just be like, nope, it's out. When I hear him say, Mom, everybody else does this, I'm the biggest loser. Nobody wants to speak to me. I don't even know what it's like. And I just want to know, like, if like everybody's trying to get me to try it. Like, what if I don't want to? What if I have an allergic reaction? What if okay. All right, let's talk about it, dude. Right? What happens if, right? I then have the power to still have space for it. Doesn't mean I'm going to support it. And that's often how we misunderstand empathy, right? When I then make space for somebody, guess what? My capacity to acknowledge is huge. Because I see this kid as a scared, whatever, I forget how old I made him, but as a scared 14-year-old, not as some disrespecting, kid who's trying to be manipulative and be and I've clearly raised somebody who's going to jail, right? Because that's the story in my head. But empathy allows me to garner space for that. And then I have room to respond. And he or she probably then has room to listen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's the challenging thing is to start with that.
Oh,
Tell me more, right? Like it's yeah. And I mean, especially for parents, like you kind of condition yourself to start with the take charge, as you described, right? Like the take charge moment. Like, I've got a 5-year-old and almost 2-year-old, and it's a lot of like, don't stick your finger in the socket and don't do that, and then stop doing that to your sister, like all this stuff, and there's probably a lot more moments than we realize, both with our kids but also with the people that we lead and manage. Is there's so much more opportunity to open the conversation with tell me more. And
totally.
if we start with that, it's just way more powerful
Oh
opportunity.
my gosh, it is. And I mean, I like your distinction there between the take charge moments, because there are times, right? Like if you're going to stick your finger in a light socket or you're going to blow up a project that we've been working on together, I'm going to be like, whoa, no, bad idea. Stop. But whenever possible, I want you to think about opening with the idea of holding space. Here's the sort of 3 phrases that allow me to do it all the time. Tell me more. As a leader, I ask this question all the time, and I really hate this question, just so we're clear. What am I missing? Because I think I'm a pretty good friggin' leader, which usually gets me into trouble. And I don't think I miss much. So when I get in this place of overwhelm, we got 3 projects on the go. We're launching another event series. My second book's coming out. I got so many balls in the air. Somebody wants me to write a forward to this. I have a podcast. I spoke in 3 different provinces today. And they're like, Joe, we really need to think about this. No, we don't. Right? And then when I can say, what am I missing? Right? They can say, well, these guys actually don't want to participate in that program anymore. Oh, well. Okay, tell me more. Right? Then it allows me to collect space. But so much of this, I often have to ask my team, what am I missing? And believe me, they will tell me. So what am I missing? The other thing I ask kids quite a bit actually is, what is the hardest part? And it's interesting because we make a lot of assumptions, even for 2 and 5-year-olds, right? That you're good, that the COVID isn't a big deal, daddy working from home, mommy, whatever the deal is. But when we say things like, what's the hardest part? They surprise the ever-loving Jesus out of you. It's also interesting when we say to our teams, what's the hardest part? And when we sort of put that out there, what it allows for is some space. And maybe there isn't anything that surprises us, but that in and of itself is great data.
Yeah. It's simple, but it's profound. And it's sometimes the simplest things, like asking a better question, or starting with a question, any question really, that could lead to conversation, right? Instead of being the directive or take charge. It's simple. And I think in the the famous words, it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yes, right? It's simple, but if it was that easy, we would have successful entrepreneurial startups all the time. And I think oftentimes a good idea is killed by a poor leader so many times, because what we fail to do is to spend. I'll tell you this. I'm actually looking at it right now. So Brene Brown, is my Lord and Savior. Okay. Now her Dare to Lead work has changed our team. I made sure our whole team went through the training. She says this: leaders must either invest a reasonable amount of time attending to fears and feelings, or squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective and unproductive behavior.
Wow.
And I keep it right here by my desk. Well, I can't, anyways, that's what I'm telling. I'm showing you, not telling.
Yeah.
But I have to look at that every day, because unless I respond to fears and feelings, unless I hold space for that, I'm feeling like I'm like, I'm not a minutia. Like, I want bottom line. Let's go. We got 87 projects in the air. Come on. What do you mean you're feeling sad? Like, for God's sake, suck it up. When I invest in that time tell me more. What's the hardest part? Right? I'm not going to stay there forever, because we don't have that time in a day. But unless I, as she says, invest a reasonable amount of time, and that depends on your business, your team, your whatever, a reasonable amount of time attending to fears and feelings, you will spend that exponentially with interest, trying to manage unproductive behavior.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just like, if there's going to be a big takeaway in this conversation right now, it is that it's make the space, acknowledge, like you pointed out earlier, and see people, right? And
Totally.
ask those questions. So I think that's really important. I just want to touch back to kind of the idea of connection and being disconnected. People always point to the obvious things that are quote unquote disconnecting us, like we're always facing our screens or this or that. I don't know if it's so obvious, but like, what is actually disconnecting us with so much technology at our disposal with which to reach other people?
I think one of our biggest concerns is proximity. And so even if you think about the square footage of the house, for example, that your grandfather was raised in, and the square footage of the house that we raise our babies in, like, what's the difference? Massive, right? So if somebody gets dysregulated in an 800 square foot house, who knows about it? Everybody,
Mm-hmm.
right? Everybody's then in some form interested in walking that baby, that person home. In the larger spaces, we lose the capacity to not just look, but to see. And there's a big difference, I think, between those things. And it is easier. One of the hardest things you will ever do, in fact, I love this activity. We did it often when we were in person doing, speaking events, is what happens if you hold gaze with somebody for 4 minutes. Look, imagine, so I think, okay, so after this, you have to go and sit down with your partner and you have to say, okay, just wait for 4 minutes, right? Most people are like, holy shit, like that would be exhausting. I mean, these are people we married and we procreated with. And the idea of, my husband and I tried this, and I was like, hey, babe, can you just look at me for 4 minutes? And he's like, why? Because I'm your bride. And he's like, oh my God, like 4 minutes in a row? What? And it's like, it's so fascinating, because what will happen is if you can hold gaze for those 4 minutes, you will cry. Because there's so much story that's held between the two of you that is often unspoken. And we're so busy in the run of a day, and our spaces are so expansive, and we would much rather look at a TV screen or the internet, because there's way less work to navigate other people's lives than there are to actually have a hard conversation. You and I to sit down and be like, okay, you know what? If I have to make dinner every night, I really need you to take one of the kids to whatever. Like, I don't want to get up. Can you please get up? Well, if I get up, they want you anyway. So why don't you just friggin' get up? Well, you know what? If you would get up, then I wouldn't. And so we get back and forth into this process, and we forget to not only look, but to really see. And it's this idea that oftentimes when we fall in love with somebody, it's because they have the capacity to regulate us. Right? First, second, third date, usually within the first 6 months, they're so good at not just looking, but seeing. Yeah. They're excited about our ideas. My husband, I have to talk about this. He is a feedlot nutritionist. Okay. So by training, he's got a PhD in ruminant nutrition, which is how do you feed cows? Initially, I was so impressed by that. Yeah. He's judging cows all over the world. He's knows, he's in feed yards. Oh my God, I'm so interested. Now I can give. You understand? We got 3 kids. I am building a company. He said, oh my God, I'm exhausted. I was up in a feed yard at 4 o'clock in the morning. I was like, you're exhausted. You want to see tired. I'll show you, right? So we get into this match of, if you're not okay, I'm not okay. And if I'm not okay, you're not okay. You used to be the one who could fill me up. So if you're exhausted and overwhelmed, if that's the first thing that comes out of your mouth when you come home, I know that I got nobody to lean on. And how do we recognize that in each other, where it's like, okay, if you're exhausted and I'm exhausted, we got to somehow find the 2% left to look after each other, or find somebody, something who can. Let's take a break, come back, whatever that deal is. Yeah, you understand? And so often right now in the middle of COVID, this is my biggest concern, right? Is everybody's tired. Senior leadership is tired. Our front line is tired. Our teachers are tired. Our police officers are tired. And we're in the middle of hard conversations around multiple generations of systemic oppression that's long overdue. Everybody's chippy and emotionally dysregulated. Do you understand? And so nobody has the capacity to acknowledge each other, right? So I have to say that I was telling a story today. I was in Walmart yesterday, and I'm a very nice person, generally speaking. Okay, like I got a website that is all about reconnection. Yeah, I'm into Walmart, and there's me and this feller in the same line. No, in the aisle, and I ended up going down the wrong way because I didn't look at the arrows. And he says to me, ah, 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 ah. And I thought he was like telling me to get down, like on the floor. Like I was a little bit concerned, like maybe somebody's shooting at us. And so I was like, oh, he's so nice. And he's like, you're going the wrong way. Do you know what I wanted to do? I wanted to ram him with my cart and be like, back up, right? Because generally speaking, we're all heightened. We're all concerned that people are not going to be safe, or we're concerned that people are making this too big of a deal, or we're concerned that, right? Everybody's all over the map, which means we have very little grace and we have very little kindness. And what is far more contagious than the virus is kindness and grace. And we need it now more than ever.
Absolutely. That's, yeah, I mean, it's really needed. It really is. Like, I can't tell you how many times, like, you know, I mean, you can look at it on social media. You don't even have to leave your house to realize the toxicity and the mudslinging and the unkindness that is going on in a lot of cases. And I mean, the shaming, like, it's just, there's so many things that are just uncalled for and unnecessary, and more kindness would go such a long way.
Totally. Yeah, I would 100% agree. And it's so hard to give it away when we're tired too, right? So
yeah.
Whose job is it? Right? And I think that's the problem. Like, then we start to finger point. Well, it's obviously the government, or it's obviously senior leadership, or it's obviously, you know, no. Right now, our biggest job is to lead from the bench. Our biggest job is to do the best we can on any given day, right? Wave at your neighbors. Buy the guy behind you into Tim's line of coffee.
Zipper merge.
Right. You will change the trajectory of a life. We're all responsible for it right now. And I think that's the tricky part. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you've painted a really good picture, I think, of the connection between relationships and connection, and then to emotional regulation. And, you know, your book, Kids These Days, is kind of all about that, right? It's about emotional regulation and giving kids the space to get dysregulated so that you can then teach them to regulate.
Yes.
Right?
Gotcha.
So if I could draw a long string, but kids that don't learn to emotionally regulate become adults that don't emotionally regulate.
Yes.
So we were talking about holding space for people before. So how can leaders create that space for this learning to take place?
Yeah, I think that there's corrective experiences all along the way. And I think what we, for a really long time, we assumed that if you really had a messed up childhood, particularly 0 to 2 or 0 to 5, if you experienced lots of trauma and you had no capacity to regulate emotion, it was over, right? Like that, you've sort of, this is it. And there's also some research called the Adverse Childhood Experiences. Vince Felitti and colleagues sort of came up with it. You know, if you have a high ACEs score, if these 10 things have happened to you, things like, you know, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, you're a product of divorce, you've been emotionally or physically neglected. If you score anything above 4, you're in big trouble. Okay, so the data is really clear about this. And it's phenomenal research, but here's the interesting thing. More recently, we're talking more about, okay, but then what? What happens to the people who experience benevolence or corrective experience? Can you, in effect, erase an ACE? And the answer is, thank you, Jesus. Yes! We can have corrective experiences along the way that make us really, really integrated, amazing people who can web together some really tough circumstances and experiences to really then lead people to greatness based on the corrective experiences we've had. And I think as a leader, what becomes really critical is really that idea of acknowledging, particularly the people who haven't, experienced that. Some of my most significant mentors were, in fact, not my parents, who are, for all intents and purposes, amazing people. But my graduate advisor changed my life. My grade 10 teacher was really critical in my views of the world. My hockey coach, who I had for 2 years, right? My bus driver, there's so many people that you can name along the way. My mentor at the Children's Hospital, there's guidances or people that have sort of given you corrective experiences. The relationship with my partner, who I've been married to for 14 years, right? That is really critical in sort of rewriting the story of what we might know to be true. So I think oftentimes when you create teams that are really invested in having the hard conversations, of really seeking to understand and be like, okay, help me understand how this went for you. What did you hear? What was the hardest part about this? I see you're not showing up in this way. Is there something I did that I can be doing better? When we have those hard corrective experiences, watch them produce, watch them be loyal, watch them create. That's how you create a committed team.
Yeah, that really is, I think, interesting, and maybe ties nicely into what I want to ask you next. But like, is it the same or is it different? Is there things that we need to know about emotional regulation for ourselves? Like, I mean, everyone gets dysregulated at some point, yeah. So, like, if you go, I know that I handle this differently and it affects me this way. Like, how do you learn for yourself, or what can you do for yourself to be better at this?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, to be honest with you, Rashad, because you cannot lead somebody when you're dysregulated yourself. And so I often say this, like the most important people in any organization is really looking after the people who hold the most emotion, right? And that tends to be in a leadership team, right? We spend a lot of time looking after people on the front lines, but I got to say, even in any school, I speak a lot to school organizations, right? A lot to police officers. And it's like, listen, if you're not looking after your teachers, they can't serve kids. Kids are the least of our worries, right? As a child psychologist, I rarely see kids. I'm most interested in the people who hold them. Because I can keep a kid in therapy till they're 65. I mean, gold standard treatment, I see them for an hour every week. It's not going to matter if I send them back into a war zone.
Mm-hmm.
What matters so significantly, right, is am I solid in my morals, my values, my vision, the plan, the direction that I'm going, particularly as I build a team. And then have I surrounded myself with the right people, which means have I built those relationships that are solid enough to know that we have connection and loyalty and that we can have the hard conversations? Because it's also not an end game. You don't just have them and then you're good. It is the constant revisiting of, are we still okay? Acknowledging, revisiting, rebuilding. John Maxwell talks a lot about that, right? Like, hope isn't a strategy. You don't just like, we're good, we're just going to hope for the best team. No, how are you going to make it happen becomes really critical.
Well, that makes sense. And I think that, for people that are listening, as we're maybe wrapping up here the conversation in the next little bit, but what is one thing to start doing and what is one thing to stop doing to improve relationship connection and emotional regulation? What would that be?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. The one thing to start doing is giving yourself some grace. And I think really understanding just how critically important you are to so many people. You are doing beautifully. And I think we often tend to be super hard on ourselves, right? The one thing that I would, yeah, exactly. The one thing that I would stop doing, I think would be the opposite of that, right? Which is to also stop. This is like a double negative, but I would then encourage you to give grace to everybody you're leading to. So stop making judgments, hold space as long as you can to seek first to understand before trying to get your point across.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So start giving grace to yourself and stop withholding grace to your team or to the people that you're working with, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know we've been talking a lot about leadership around this. You know, a lot of the work that you're involved in is related to kids and the people that are working with kids. But, you know, I think that's, like I said earlier, one of the things that attracted me to your work is that this is so kind of critical across the board and in so many different environments. So I've really enjoyed talking about this with you. Is there, before I ask you my couple of last questions, is there anything you would like to add or leave the listeners with as we're wrapping up?
Yeah, you know what I think I've been thinking a lot about in the last little bit is really as we grow this company, particularly in the world of, you know, entrepreneurial land, is very few of us are born leaders. In fact, none of us are. We have to learn how to become them. And very quickly in the run of our company, you know, we went from Marty and I, who was, you know, deemed my assistant. She's now the director of brand operations, and we have 13 people that we manage to try to navigate all kinds of things, right? And it is, I think, the capacity to understand that if you look after your people, they will rise. Don't forget how critically important it is to just stay connected to them as you build magic, right? You don't, more is not necessarily better. I was really at the belief for a really long time, right? That I wanted to employ 150 people. That was going to be fantastic. I don't have that much space to invest a reasonable amount of time in fears and feelings to that many people and ensure that we're going to do what we want to do, which is reconnect a disconnected world. If I can keep my 5 really tight and close and know that they will do anything for me and let me know when I'm messing up, then the rest is easy, right? Because you have enough people on the ground. So I think that's the point for me, is like really the core that you can create becomes so critically important.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's great because that answers the question I was going to ask you next, which is what is one thing you know about life or leadership that you wish everyone knew? So to recap that, right?
Yeah.
Keep your core, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. So last question then for you, and then let's have a little plug of what you're up to and what's coming up for you and the team. When it's all said and done, what 3 words do you want used to describe your life?
I really love that question. I think that what's really critical to me is that there's some inspiration and there's some hope, and that there is a huge, huge element of joy.
I like those. Those are good. And you know, I don't do video for the podcast mostly, but you know, you're an enthusiastic and happy and joyful person in my experience, so I can definitely see that, and I appreciate that about you. Thank you.
Oh, I love it. Thank you.
So, Dr. Jody, yeah, let's plug your work. What's going on? What's coming up? You mentioned another book coming out. There's all kinds of exciting stuff. What's happening?
I know. Yeah. So we launch Teachers These Days, hopefully in August. And so that's supposed to go to the publisher next week, which is fantastic. And then we, this year in COVID, because I was speaking on stages all over the place before, and then of course all of this has turned virtual. So we launched a 4-part event series in 2021. The first we did was it's called Stay Lit, Reconnecting Communities. That was in January. Our next event is Together, which is May 8th. It's reconnecting women and a female energy. Anybody who identifies as a female energy, how do we sort of recognize that in our leadership and in our companies, in our parenting relationships. So that's in May 8th. And then we do Relit again for teachers, which is in August. So the events really have become the biggest focus for us. And I think just Just really continuing, I think, this idea of how do we speak about it. I'm on live every morning at 7:30 on our Facebook page, and, just growing this community that is just so loyal to be able to cast a stone, right? How do we stay reconnected in our communities? We can't tell them, we got to show them.
Awesome. And so for anyone that wants to connect with you and maybe watch your lives at 7:30 in the morning, where can they go?
Instagram is Jody Carrington, Dr. Jody Carrington, I think. And then our Facebook page is also Dr. Jody Carrington. So follow us there. We would love you to be part of our community. We talk lots about leadership and connection and all the things that I know, Rashad, you're building here so beautifully. So thank you so much for having me. It was so fun.
Awesome. Yeah. And I mean, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom in the areas of relationship and connection. Emotional regulation has been a really interesting conversation. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time today. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, would you head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, leave me a rating, leave me a review, and share this with a friend. It spreads the word and helps the podcast grow. You can also find me on social media at R.E. Oberlander. Until next time, stay awesome.